Shigeru Miyamoto, the Nintendo savant, has widely been regarded as one of the best creators of all time for taking us on adventures far and wide. One such adventure has been deeply embedded in the annals of video gaming history. So gather your power, wisdom, and courage. It's time for a brief history of Zelda. Inspired primarily from Miyamoto's childhood adventures exploring woods, caves, and secluded lakes, Legend of Zelda's gameplay was designed in part from Miyamoto's choice to make Mario less about the high score and more about the game itself. Trading in the sequential structure of Mario for the more non-linear structure of Zelda proved to be a wise decision, and despite doubt from Nintendo management, Legend of Zelda would be the first NES title to sell over 1 million copies, and to this day often makes the list of most influential games, commonly being seen as the forerunner of the modern-day RPG. Needless to say, with a popularity as such, it received numerous sequels. Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link released less than a year after its predecessor in Japan, and hit American shelves in 1988. Though many have a love and hate relationship with The Adventure of Link, the game is responsible for introducing many elements that became commonplace in later games, such as non-player characters and the use of Magic Meter, as well as Shadow Link, aka Dark Link. Switching out part of the aerial view gameplay for side-scrolling action is what made Nintendo Power say that it was a refreshing departure from the previous Zelda, naming it the 12th best NES game of all time in 2008. A few years would go by before the third installment in the series was released, but it was quite possibly the most popular of the franchise. The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past started out as a third installment for the NES, but would eventually be developed for the Super Famicom and SNES systems. Doubling the storage space from 4 megabits to 8 megabits and compressing graphics allowed for the world of Link to be much more expansive. The game also was the basis for the short-lived 12-issue serial published in Nintendo Power, as well as 2 mangas. The first Zelda adventure for the Nintendo Game Boy was released in 1993 under the title Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. The fourth installment of the series began as a port of A Link to the Past, but under the direction of Tezuka became an original project. Influenced in part by Twin Peaks, Tezuka intended for the game to give off a similar feeling, featuring characters in a small town and an owl. Link's Awakening went on to win several awards and remained on bestseller lists for more than 7 years. Then 1998 brought a whole new dimension to the series with The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time for the Nintendo 64. Like many games for the system, it was making the leap to the three-dimensional realm. Upon release, it sold more than 1 million copies in less than a week. Again, it was another of the Zelda games to be consistently featured on most influential gaming lists, and has seen multiple re-releases for more modern systems. Reusing the gaming engine from Ocarina, fans of the series did not have to wait as long for the direct sequel. Majora's Mask for the N64 released in 2000. IGN described the game as the Empire Strikes Back of the 64, telling a much better and darker story than the previous installments. Majora's Mask sold over 3 million copies worldwide. Returning to the handheld game Legend of Zelda: Oracle of Seasons, as well as Oracle of Ages, released for the Game Boy Color in 2001. Initially being developed as 3 interconnected games, Mystical Seed of Power, Mystical Seed of Wisdom, and Mystical Seed of Courage, the task of coordinating the 3 games proved to be rather difficult, and was changed to only 2 games at the request of Miyamoto himself. It didn't seem to phase the sales at all, as each title sold nearly 4 million copies. In 2002, A Link to the Past was re-released, this time being ported to the Game Boy Advance, and featured a brand new 9th installment to the Zelda line with 4 swords. A multiplayer game only, 4 Swords teams up 2 to 4 players to work through the dungeons and puzzles together, all while competing for rupees. The release almost won IGN's Best of E3 Best in Show award, and only lost to Metroid Fusion, as judges felt that the inclusion of A Link to the Past had the unfair advantage of being a remake. Then came a new drastic change as Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker released for the GameCube in 2003. Though the game received critical acclaim, players were divided on the new art direction. Referred to as cel shading, a style made popular in video games from its prior use in Fear Effect and Jet Set Radio, the result created a more cartoon-like design that not all fans were happy about, and was reflected in its sales. Four Swords Adventure was released for the GameCube in 2004, and saw once again multiple links in a multiplayer co-op. Though unlike the previous Four Swords release, adventures could be played single player if need be. Then Link and Zelda made their leap back to the handheld with the Minish Cap for the Game Boy Advance. Released in Japan in 2004 and the US in 2005, it sold over 1 million units worldwide by March of that year, with the primary complaint being that it was too short, but seemingly excelling in every other category. The 13th installment found its home on the Nintendo Wii in November of 2006 with a release on the GameCube a month later. Taking place 100 years after Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, and in an alternate timeline from Wind Waker, Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess has become the best-selling game in the series, having sold nearly 9 million copies worldwide as of September 2015. The Twilight team steered clear of cel shading and focused on more realistic graphics as well as realistic horseback riding, which won the game multiple awards. The Nintendo DS received two more releases, Phantom Hourglass in 2007 and Spirit Tracks in 2009. Both were sequels to Wind Waker and featured the same visual style. The development team behind Four Swords Adventures were responsible for the titles and worked to have them developed for the two-screen system, with a touchscreen map on one screen and gameplay on the other. Both games received praise, Phantom Hourglass slightly more than Spirit Tracks, which was still nominated for Best Handheld Game at the Game Developers' Choice Awards. Skyward Sword was released in 2011 for the Nintendo Wii after being developed for nearly 5 years. Drawing influence from Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, and Twilight Princess, as well as an art style influenced by Impressionist Paul Cézanne, Skyward Sword served as an origin story of the Master Sword, and sold over 3 million copies worldwide. It would be the last of the home gaming console releases for nearly the next 6 years. 2013 brought Zelda fans A Link Between Worlds for the Nintendo 3DS. A successor to A Link to the Past, it featured many of the same elements and similar gameplay. In an attempt to change its standard structure, A Link Between Worlds allowed for players to rent items as well as complete most dungeons in any order they want. From the audio to the level of difficulty, the game was constantly praised, despite having gone through a 1-year development freeze in 2010. A direct sequel, Triforce Heroes, was released in 2015 to less than great reviews when critics praised the multiplayer mode but felt the single-player mode was lacking. In 2017, Zelda was back on her home gaming consoles with The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. Featuring detailed physics, voice acting, and HD graphics, Breath of the Wild has already been praised as one of the greatest video games of all time, with critics calling it a masterpiece. Breaking Nintendo's launch title records, Breath sold 1.3 million copies in the United States during its first month. These were only the primary releases. There were more, like Zelda's Adventure, where it was Zelda's turn to save Link, or Link: The Faces of Evil, and Zelda: The Wand of Gamelon, all three of which were made independently with no input from Nintendo. There were even multiple LCD games and a cancelled pinball game from Golly. Multiple spin-offs like Hyrule Warriors have found their own fanbase, along with the largely popular crossover appearance in the Super Smash Bros. Franchise. Even with only mentioning the games, we barely scratch the surface of how deep and how far this fandom and franchise reaches. Link and Zelda have also appeared in Captain N, the Game Master, as well as a 13-episode cartoon from DiC Entertainment which aired in 1989 as part of the Super Mario Bros. Super Show. There has also been a short-lived comic book series from Valiant Comics that was released in 2 volumes in 1993, as well as a plethora of manga adaptations. There have been novels, game books, art books, soundtracks, a failed attempt at a big screen adaptation, as well as a Monopoly and Clue-inspired Zelda board game. And the fans are as dedicated as Link is to saving Hyrule. Multiple fan-made short films, fake trailers, and computer animations have been made in the name of Zelda, like our own Beatdown Boogie's Hang 'em Hyrule, or the epically beautiful and dark Majora's Mask Terrible Fate. Fans and developers have never given up on Zelda, and the success of Breath of the Wild proves that this 30-year-old franchise still has a very bright future ahead of it.